So we have finished discussing the laws and regulations and also the ethics. But how do I achieve compliance? Now that we have an understanding of compliance, which is in line with within the laws and regulations, including the standards of this industry, how can I achieve it? Then let's look at the part about documentation. For the entire company, it needs to first clarify a safety policy. As we mentioned earlier, the safety policy comes from the top management. It is a very general one, such as we must reach a certain level of protection, or we must meet the corresponding legal requirements. This is what we call the safety policy and strategy. The safety policy and strategy actually convey the safety expectations of the top management. As we mentioned earlier, these expectations come from the scale or industry requirements of our company. There may be some safety risks which are actually safety needs. I need to make these safety risks acceptable. This is the safety situation of our top management. That is, you have to comply, at least you have to comply with laws and regulations, industry standards. But the question is, how do you operate specifically? We can understand that the safety policy and strategy of the top management set a tone for our safety work. You must meet a certain level of protection or meet the requirements of a certain industry. How to achieve it specifically? As you can see here, the standard, baseline, and guidelines are followed through the execution process. We also talked about the standard, baseline, and guidelines in the last chapter. What is it? It is the CSO, the senior management responsible for safety, or we can understand it as the department responsible for safety in the organization. They propose it, which is the responsibility of the CSO. How does he do it specifically? What is our planning process? So here we need to cooperate. That is, the top management sets the tone, and the middle management is responsible for deployment and implementation. This document mentions a baseline. What is the baseline? This is very important. We call the baseline, which is used a lot in foreign companies. The so-called baseline is a line that has been drawn. You can look down. We just mentioned that the policy comes from the top management and the standards and guidelines come from our security department, that is the CSO. This is like the CEO setting the tone. So what about the CSO? To clarify the standards and guidelines, and the content of the standards and guidelines will be a lot. We can understand it as a series of relatively standard things. Among these standards, what we must do for a certain scenario is called the baseline. We can understand the baseline as the minimum requirement in the standard. It's like, if I can't even meet this minimum requirement, then you don't even have the basic functions of this information system business. You must go offline. Maybe I'm not doing very well, but at least I can use it. This is the baseline. We can understand the baseline like this. For example, if I want to go online with a server, my server must install what operating system, patch which day, what antivirus system needs to be installed, and what business software needs to be installed. What middleware needs to be installed. These requirements are quite standard for which version to install. If you can't even do this, then your business system definitely can't go online. Let alone whether it's safe or reliable, it doesn't meet business requirements. So the baseline is the minimum requirement. Everyone needs to know this. Only when the baseline is met, we may talk about whether we can do better. We can call the standards, guidelines, and baseline as secondary documents, generally made by the manager of the security department or the chief security officer. Then the primary document is the policy and strategy we just mentioned. How to do it specifically? These are measures, some operation manuals, some configuration documents, including some specific measures, some details. We call this part the tertiary document, that is, the security of the entire organization. From the perspective of security documents, the primary document is the safety policy and strategy, which is a very general document. The secondary document includes standards, guidelines, some requirements. The tertiary document is some specific implementation details, operations, operation manuals, white papers. These are tertiary documents. This series of documents can effectively let our information security standards be implemented. Otherwise, it's all castles in the air. You just say, I have to meet a certain level of protection, but how to do it specifically, I don't know. It needs to be continuously refined. We can also understand it as a further process.